Hi, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on the issue of eisegesis versus exegesis and managing misinformation and disinformation that is coming out more and more with respect to religion and science. And sometimes there is significant overlap. And so we're going to just quickly look at this issue and how important it is because it is at the root of a significant amount of misinformation and disinformation that is out there, that is flowing. And so I just want to point out to you the differences between eisegesis and exegesis so that when you see it, you know it, and then you know what to do with it. Now we're going to use an actual example so you can see firsthand how important this issue is and how it's playing out in present times. And so when you think about eisegesis, eisegesis is basically this subjective approach to scripture or subjective approach to science. We're going to focus on scripture for now. And so it's non-analytic, it's subjective. The individual is interjecting their own personal viewpoint, their imagination, their fantasy, their confirmation bias. They are not necessarily concerned with what the scripture actually says. They are concerned with simply getting their point across. They don't really care about what the actual writing is. That seemed, it's less important than what it is that they are trying to convey. And so they often sacrifice the truth, meaning what's written, in exchange for their own personal interpretation. And so they don't necessarily go to the source and then direct you to go to the source. Instead, they give you their own analysis and interpretation and may not even show you the source when they are doing this. You see this with all of this science reporting, and you see it with religion that's going on, particularly on topics that are overlapping science and religion right now. And so, in contrast, when you look at exegesis, what's happening is the individual is approaching the text, the scripture, in a very analytic, deconstructive manner. They are searching for the truth and they are seeking out the actual meaning of words, the actual meaning of a sentence, the actual context in which this communication was made. They are looking at grammar, etymology, and you will see cross referencing. And so there's a distinction between this exegesis and eisegesis, simply in terms of the approach. With exegesis, you actually need a text or you actually need some scientific research to deal with in order to analyze and interpret. When you're looking at eisegesis, however, the only thing that matters is the person's opinion. Again, they may not even show you the source or take you to the source, and you need to be very careful about that. And so I'm going to say this with respect to scripture. Again, I am not a biblical scholar. However, this is a red flag when individuals are supposedly teaching you from the scripture. The first thing they should do is give you the book, chapter, and verse. They should let you know exactly what version they are using so that you can go to that if possible. And they should also make sure that you are reading along. And not only should they do that, you should do that. That's your responsibility. So exegesis is your responsibility, irrespective of the possibility that somebody might be engaging in eisegesis. And so what's happening, however, is when individuals are using this eisegesis to manipulate, because that's a part of eisegesis also with science and religion, is that individuals may use this to manipulate and to spread misinformation and disinformation. They may tell you that the other people who are doing exegesis are the actual ones engaged in the misinformation and disinformation, which is very prevalent these days in terms of those assertions. And so you just need to be mindful of checking for yourself. But sometimes what's happening is that people are being lazy. And so therefore they just want someone to tell them what the scripture says. They want someone to tell them what the science says. They want the news reporter to tell them. They want the politician to tell them. They want this so-called YouTube teacher or pastor to tell them versus simply seeking out for themselves. And so it's important that you engage in exegesis regardless of whether someone is engaging in eisegesis. And so here are some points to remember when you know you are seeing exegesis versus eisegesis. When you are looking at exegesis, the individual who's communicating will be able to engage in exposition related to what's being communicated, whatever the literature is, whatever the science is, whatever the scripture is. They will be able to talk to you about the actual interpretation of it. They don't give you little sound bites. They actually go into it and give you an explanation. They give you an editorial based upon what's actually there. And so it doesn't lead into it, it's leading out of it. And so it's taking from what is and then extrapolating, then elucidating. It's not about them, it's about the text, it's about the science, it's about the research, it's about the scripture. And so that's what you are not seeing. You are seeing people who are simply giving you their interpretation of their own interpretation, and they don't really care what the scripture says. And sometimes people will use things like prophecy to avoid exegesis because they want to do the eisegesis, because exegesis takes a lot more work. Now we're going to jump into this important example here, and it's about knowing right from wrong. And so there is significant discussion about this idea of right and the right hand. And so many people are offering opinions about things based upon this word right. What's problematic here is that individuals are not taking the time to do the exegesis in order to adequately inform people about what this word right even means in scripture. And so we're just going to walk through it so that you see what is meant by the word right versus just someone telling you what they feel, because you hear a lot of people saying, I don't feel this, or I don't believe this. And it's not as important what they feel and what they believe as it is what is written and what is meant and what is actually being communicated. And so with respect to this word right and this construct of right hand, many individuals are simply focusing on their general understanding of what it means to have a right versus a left hand, just in general terms. However, when you are looking at these translations and then these etymologies and interpretations, what you find is that even though the words right and hand are communicated, they don't always mean right hand the way that people typically understand a right hand. And so you see here that right hand can actually mean left-handed. It can actually mean south or southward based upon the context and the understanding of the positioning of the right hand when someone is standing a particular way, or the left hand when someone is standing a particular way. And so in many instances, it's believed that the right hand is the south. However, left-handed is usually attached to this phrase of being a southpaw. And so you see this here where in one instance south and right are correlated, then in other instances left and south are correlated. Now going back to Strong's Concordance, this gets a little bit deeper. And so you see this reiteration of the possibility that you could be talking about a right hand or a left hand simply using the word right, and that's because of the deeper meaning of the word right. And so with respect to this idea of right, you have this notion of the stronger or the more dexterous hand. And so it's not really about the direction, it's really about the understanding of the hand, how the hand operates. And so when you say that someone is right-handed or left-handed, the right hand would be whichever hand is the stronger hand for the individual, or the more dexterous hand for the individual. And so this is not necessarily about the direction or the side of the body. And here's the commentary about the dynamic of south being right. Now we're going to look specifically at dexios. And dexios indicates that it's the right hand or the right side. We're going to go again a little deeper, looking at this idea of right. And you can see here, this is a little bit more profound in terms of this idea of right. And you see here that it means take hold of as well as to point out. And so it's the hand that the individual uses for that purpose. Again, that idea of the stronger hand, or the hand that the person usually utilizes. So if a person is left-handed, that's the stronger hand, that's the more dexterous hand, then that's their right hand, whether it's the left hand or the right hand. Now this gets a little bit more nuanced, and there is a lot of interpretation that goes along with this. We're just going to stick with the basic wording though for now. And so here you have this idea of dexios, this idea of the right hand being the feminine hand. This is very symbolic because this is related to this idea of a female being a recipient versus a giver. And so it talks about the hand which usually takes. Again, this is related to the more dexterous hand, the hand that receives. And so the right hand is whichever hand is the receiving hand, whichever hand is the taking hand. And remember, people generally take or receive things based upon their handedness. And so if a person is left-handed, they are going to grab something with their left hand. If they are right-handed, they will tend to grab something with the right hand. And so this idea of right hand is related to the hand that takes, the hand that receives. Not only that, but the hand that accepts and the hand that welcomes. And so it just simply means the receptive hand or arm or whatever you're talking about when you're talking about right. And so right is about the hand that simply accepts. So it doesn't have to really do anything. It doesn't have to take anything. It just is the recipient. And here it goes deeper into it, and you see it just really talks about this idea of taking something or being taken by that particular hand, that hand accepting something, that hand receiving something, that hand welcoming something, welcoming the receipt of something. And so, or when you look at it this way, it's not really talking about the direction or a particular side of the body. It's just simply talking about wherever it is received. So it can be the right or the left hand. It doesn't really matter. It's just whichever one accepted something, whichever one received something, whatever was taken by a particular side, a particular hand, whatever was welcomed, and that becomes the right. And here it talks about this idea of understanding this construct both literally and figuratively. And here again, there's just this reiteration of the meaning of right being taking or receiving something. There are other understandings of right also associated with that which is morally correct, whatever is not bent, whatever is straight, whatever is direct. And so right is also related to the word rule or regency or regal or royal. So it's the ruling hand. Again, that dominant, that powerful side, whichever side it happens to be. You might also notice that in Old Persian, Rasta, the word Rasta is related to this idea of being straight and right. Again, you have this idea of right, meaning morally upright, the right, the straight, the just side or hand. And in terms of etymology, you have this reiteration of it meaning literally stronger or correct hand. In some instances, though, it does definitely means the opposite of left. And there are lots of symbolic dynamics going on with these words right and left also. And here again, you see this mention of dexterity, and that being the important issue with respect to right, the hand which is good. You also have the hand which is chief or first. And more extrapolation with respect to that idea of right and reg and rule and royal. And there are some other words in other languages that translate to right, and one is Ras. When you think of Rosh Hashanah, the idea of Rus or Rosh, the head, so the chief, the important hand, the stronger hand, the chief, the head, the king hand. And here you also see this in the Arabic. What's interesting is when you do the anagram of Ras, and the anagram of Ras is Sar, which is interesting because they basically mean the same thing, either going forward or in reverse. And as a little reminder, we've discussed this before, but that Sar and that Ras both relate to this idea of being a prince, a king, a queen, and also the idea of Saracen and Cherokee related to rising and Eastern. So again, all of this relating with this idea of right. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.